I mentioned in the beginning of this life story my great-great-grandparents joining the Mormon Church. What's really interesting is that my family has been converted to Mormonism separately in 4 different generations, independent of the previous generation. By that I mean that my great-grandparents joined the church and my great-grandfather did. My grandfather was not a member of the church, but my grandmother was converted by the Mormon missionaries. But my father was not converted. My father was later converted by a miraculous priesthood blessing, independent of his mother's conversion. And then I was taught the gospel when I was 10 by my father, and I represent that fourth generation. It's interesting. One thinks a lot about why one believes certain things, but I was just reading my father's life history, and he closes it with a very strong spiritual witness of what he believes, and he admits that while he hasn't always been a faithful practicer of his religion, he has never doubted it, and that he has explicit faith in God and and belief in the future of a life in eternity. And it was really interesting to me to read that because I had forgotten that. But my father, his life was defined by a number of things, but one of the things that defined him was that he was a very strong believer, person I would consider of great faith. For whatever reasons, I am too. I am a person who believes in belief, as it were, in the sense that I have very deep spiritual convictions that there is something beyond this life and something beyond this world, that there is within the great scheme of things within the universe not only a guiding intelligence, but actual loving, caring individuals who are our divine parents, and their Son, who is the Savior of the world. Those are the deepest convictions that I have. But I'm also an independent thinker. I'm also what I would call a liberal progressive Mormon. I have an article coming out in the next issue of Dialogue. It was based on the lecture I gave, part of the Eugene England Memorial Lecture Series at Utah Valley University, and the title is Why Liberalism is the Ultimate Flowering of Mormonism. So that liberal or progressive impulse expresses my Mormonism in some particular ways. It certainly does so in my teaching. It does so in my writing. And I hope it does so in my personal life. For example, I've been invited to be one of a dozen scholars the past few years charged with the responsibility of developing a Mormon ethic of war and peace. And I have published and written and spoken about peace and about war, and continue to do that because I feel that ultimately the peace is the only solution to a war or to a world in which there is conflict. That Jesus' nonviolent resistance to evil and to violence is the one that will ultimately prove successful. So I believe in being active in one's community. I believe my liberal progressive Mormonism has led me to be very passionately engaged in issues, as I mentioned earlier, about minorities and blacks and the priesthood, about women's issues. I am a feminist who believes that women deserve all of the rights and privileges that men have, and that I work for that kind of equality, which does not exist in the world yet. I have been, for over 4 decades, passionately involved in issues relating to LGBT people, both Mormons and non-Mormons. So I've published and spoken frequently. I've written a number of things, including Requiem for a Gay Mormon about Stuart Mattis, a wonderful young Latter-day Saint who took his life on the portal of the Los Altos stake during a period of time when the Mormon Church was very much involved in the opposing gay marriage. I am the author of an important booklet on a guide for LDS families with LGBT children, produced by the Family Acceptance Project at San Francisco State University. Dr. Caitlin Ryan, my co-author. I speak frequently on this issue and continue to work for change in avenues that I can, because I feel that the gays worldwide are a threatened group of people, and that there is in our society still a great deal of prejudice and discrimination against them. And so that's one of the issues that I'm involved in. I also have been involved for the past 10 years with the Liahona Children's Foundation, a foundation made up of a group of faithful Latter-day Saints who are trying to address malnutrition among children, LDS children, and others in the developing world. And that foundation, which we began with working in one stake in South America, and with a budget of about $30,000, we're now in 200 stakes in 18 countries with a budget of about $1 million. Still a long way from where we need to be, but those children to me represent the ones the Savior was talking about in the 25th chapter of Matthew as being among the least, or those who are considered or treated least in our culture. And so I'm passionately involved in that, and have traveled to Guatemala and Colombia and the Philippines and the South Pacific, and we'll be going to Peru and to Guatemala again this spring. I was in Haiti in August, attempting to help set up programs so that our foundation can provide nutrition for these children. The fact of the matter is that religion has no meaning if it doesn't have meaning in our actual everyday lives. That is, if we just write and talk about it, it isn't really religion. It's when we do something with what we believe to make a difference in the world. Mother Teresa sums up what I believe. We can do no great things, only small things with great love. And it is that impulse, I think, that it is the heart of almost everybody to address issues of inequality and suffering and injustice in the world, that I think makes what all religion have in common is that impulse toward love and the impulse toward compassion, the impulse toward reducing and relieving suffering. So in my work is essentially centered on those principles, because I believe that fundamentally they are what represents the salvation of the world. That if we are to ever evolve to a place where we surrender our violence to nonviolence, or we surrender our hate to love, we surrender our indifference to compassion, those are the things that give me hope, and I am a person of great hope. You know, Paul's faith, hope, and charity. These three things, it seems to me, are the foundation, for me at least, of me as a Christian, of a Christian life, is to have faith, is to have hope, and to have charity, which in the King James is charity, but which the Book of Mormon defines as the pure love of Christ. That pure love which ultimately is willing to sacrifice itself for someone else and to find justice in the world, to right the world which is broken and often off course, is what I think religion is. And I know there are people, it's very popular these days for people to say, I'm spiritual, not religious. And when people say that, I sometimes say, well, when's the last time a group of spiritual people got together to feed the poor or to stop war? Religion religious sentiment and religious action and spirituality don't need to be seen as somehow alien or separate from one another. Ultimately, I think they are combined in their most powerful expressions when they are seen together.